just put more paper currency out there in circulation, and then that'll solve the debt problem.
Nope.
I came up with an idea for that too.
What was it?
We should just tax all of their campaign funds.
Oh. Why not?
Because then nobody will miss it if we have a few less ads on TV about campaign funds and all that stuff. Tax politicians will carry it.
Think about the last time
Oh,
you had
yes.
it. They were limited on. Say, where's the last one you had it? I got it.
Business spending, really.
Gee.
All right.
Anyone live stream it?
Think that,
Yes.
Here we are.
the federal government, budget is riches to infinity and beyond. That's how we think.
What?
But it seems when it comes to campaign, we have number ending supply.
So welcome back.
Let them pay for the taxation.
Welcome, welcome.
Announcement for the ladies. We are meeting on Monday evening at Alicia's
Ooh.
for Rosh
Nice.
Chodesh.
Baked potato bar.
Baked potato
Oh,
bar.
man, sounds good.
So I'll do the baked potatoes. I have chili and then like butter, cheese, sour cream,
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. And then if you guys, ladies want to bring any topping for it or a side or anything else.
Okay.
What's the name? I'm sorry.
Baked potato bar.
So there you go.
That's Sunday?
Monday evening at 6.
What is this?
Alicia's.
And it's apartment complex, so sometimes parking is a little, yes,
Challenging?
challenging. But I'll open up my spot.
So we've
But
Carpool?
manage-
We figured it
carpool,
out.
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
However.
Yeah. So we'll be over there. Alicia lives over by, is it
Peach and
and
Ashland,
South.
yeah, I can send anyone my
Southwest of
address if
Peach
you
and
don't have
Ashland,
it,
right
but it's, where the new Clovis, social buildings are at, High Winco, all that stuff over
where it used to be Costco.
Willow and Ashland.
there. Okay, yeah, so we're close by, yeah.
So yeah.
All right.
So Kislev, beginning that month, and for those of you who haven't seen a calendar or are curious and haven't looked at it yet, Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah is on Christmas evening, so the 25th of December this year.
On Messiah, Mass Eve.
Yeah,
Coincides.
that same day,
How that
December
works out.
20, sometimes.
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes. So December 25th and the first candle lit for Hanukkah, same day, Christmas night. So, there was something else that just flowed through my brain and left.
Something else?
There was, but that's okay. Oh, on 2 weeks from tomorrow, on December, 15th, I believe. Yes. Temple Beth Israel is doing their annual Hanukkah Bazaar, if anybody's interested in going over there. And just, it's a fundraiser for their women's group is called the Sisterhood, and they do a lot of, charity and stuff like that in the city. So or in the Jewish community, I probably should say. So annually they do this Hanukkah Bazaar at Temple Beth Israel. It's on Maroa, just south of Herndon.
And north of Sierra.
And north of Sierra. When you're going there, it can be really easy to miss because it's not super obvious that there's a building there. So look for the large white brick wall. They're, kind of in a protected visual.
And go through the gate.
Yes, and you go in through the gate, into the parking lot, park wherever. There'll be signs, you'll be able to tell the part of the building that it's in. There are vendors from around the city that come in there.
Kind of like a craft fair.
Like a craft fair kind of thing.
Dawn, I
Just-
know where the place is.
Yes,
I've done worship there.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And there's also like their bookstore for their stuff. So if you need a Hanukkah or want a different one or
Candles.
anything, or candles, that's a good place to get your supplies stocked up on candles and that kind of thing. Also, I will just plug the pastrami sandwiches are incredible. So,
Wow.
What are the hours for it? Because it said all day this time, and I think you said last year.
yeah, generally speaking, it's been like from 9 to 2, but on their calendar it says all day. So, but I would think that you'd be safe in that window there and everything.
If you want to plan a lunch.
Just go hang out. They love it. So, anyway. And they always expect people to come in that are, not Jewish, that know Yeshua, and all that kind of thing. So it's kind of good. The 15th of December, it's a Sunday. Yeah. So it's a fun thing.
The 15th, yes. 1 to 5. All right, for announcements?
Yep.
That's good. All right. Then let's pray. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and commanded us to engage in the study of all the words of Torah. Please, Adonai our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we and our descendants and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel. Amen. Amen. Well, today we are reading the very sparse patriarchal narrative regarding Yitz'khaq. He's only contained in this parashah, this week's reading, his life. There are things about him, about his birth previously, right? But his birth and the Akedah, the sacrifice, where Abraham sacrifices Isaac or attempts to. But he's in that story, but it's more of a story of Abraham, right? And his birth and all that. He's kind of a passive, more or less, part of that. And then through his son Yaakov, in moving into the future. And then this week's parashah portion really speaks the most about his activities during his lifetime. The single parashah. And I think, as we noted last week, he is very unique in the patriarchal imagery, if you will. He's the only one who never leaves the land, the only patriarch who never leaves Eretz Yisrael, the land of promise. And he's kind of the I don't know how you'd put it, but he's a key player, but in other people's stories, like I mentioned, about Abraham and his son Yaakov. He is the only one who is monogamous of the patriarchs, and that kind of emphasized that original thing I think we talked about it last week, where the word ahava, love, is used for the second time regarding Yitz'khaq and his marriage to Rivka, right? It says he loved her. And that is the second mention of the word love. The first one is association with the father and son, Avraham and Yitz'khaq. And that's the one that's actually spoken by God, I think, too, when he tells him to take your son, your only son, the one you love, right? So that's the first mention of the word love between the father and the son. And then spoken by God. There's some messianic overtones in that, isn't there? I think you can't miss that. Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. Yitz'khaq remembered what it said earlier in Torah. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Notice it's singular.
Yeah.
And he knew that, so he said, it's best to live monogamous.
So he's the only one of the patriarchs who did so. And he's the only one who became a farmer. And that's an interesting thing because, farming and that's a what's the word when you travel around? Nomadic, thank you. Yeah, it's a non-nomadic profession, right? Where you can't take crops with you when you're wandering around. So he was a kind of a planter. He stayed in one place. Let's see. And those are some of the unique things about his patriarchal role. Yet, of course, very significant in the narrative. Okay, so our portion that we read today kind of jumps into the middle of the story of the conflict between Esav and Yaakov, the two sons, right? And it jumps in the middle of that where where am I here? Here. With the blessing that Yitz'khaq gives to Yaakov, who he thinks is Esav, right? So verse 28, it says, Ve'yiten lecha ha'elohim mital ha'shamayim, and may God give to you, ve'yiten lecha, may he give to you, ha'elohim, the God, excuse me, mital ha'shamayim, from the dew of the heavens. Umishmenei ha'aretz ve'rov dagan ve'tirosh, and from the richness of the earth, and the abundance of grain and sweet wine. And the Hebrew is very symbolic, even in its interpretation into English, because that word mishmenei, the richness of the earth, mishmenei, for those of you Hebrew students may note that is a word that comes from the word shemen. I don't know if you hear that, shemen and mishmenei, shmenei, shemen, so oil. Shemen is oil. It's a very well-known kind of Hebrew word. So it's really, literally it says from the oil of the earth. And when you think of oil, you shouldn't think of oil derricks going up and down and
olive oil.
You should think of olive oil, right? Because that's the oil that would have been in the front of everyone's mind in that era. And what is olive oil signifies a tree that's grown and produced fruit, and that fruit has been processed into something usable, right? So you see this concept of that richness being all of those things, meaning that you have land, you have trees, you have harvest, you have people, right? Because it takes people to process olive oil and pressing and lots of work and planting and so forth. So that's kind of richness of the earth. It's not just gold and then our hills. It's the product of that in community and in activities and all of life. It's like you see a rich life in that concept of oil, right? So that word mishmenei should, in your mind, flower into all of that community kind of activity that's dependent upon the source of oil that comes from the olives that God, provides all the things to grow, and you participate with them.
Sounded like he wanted to be a farmer.
What's that?
Sounded like he wanted him to be a farmer.
Yeah, well, that's what he was. He ends up being that. It it infers a future of being in a land, right, where you are planted, kind of like Isaac was, Yitz'khaq.
But it's really, to me, it was a symbolic of the blessing of God being given to them, because they're dependent on God for the harvest of all of those things. The rain, you're dependent on God for the rain, you're dependent on God for the fruit. You're dependent on the Lord for all of that. So when he's giving them the blessing of that, he's giving them the blessing of God present with him. That's the first
Right.
time I ever really seen it.
It's like the blessing's fleshed out. It's and that concept is also contained in the concept of dew, tal. The dew. It's a metaphor in all of Scripture. I remember back at the beginning of Genesis, it says there was a mist that rose from the ground. Not rain, but a mist. So this concept of moisture, like that, is. And the metaphor of dew is this moisture in abundance. It's not moisture that's been evaporated from the ground and returned to the ground, right? That's kind of a static system of hydration, if you will. This is dew is addition to what exists already. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like this is coming from somewhere. You think of Israel, the land. Where does their dew come from? It comes from the winds off of the Mediterranean Ocean, right? That blow into the land. It's bringing fresh, new moisture into the hydration system. So it's that abundance that is supplemental and sourced from somewhere else. Is the concept, like when this talks about God giving you the dew of the heavens. That's not just hydration; it's additional, additive blessing.
Well, coming from Monterey County, a rich farmland, they have a lot of dew. They have a lot of moisture that comes in from off. And
Right.
it's when you talk about the olive oil was used for all sorts of things, for lubrication, for food, for lighting their lamps. It was an incredible source of livelihood and survival at that particular time. So he's really blessing him well, especially in Israel, where it's a lot drier. Monterey County is a semi-arid climate as well.
Yeah.
So
It
these are
requires
very,
that, yeah.
very important gifts, so to speak, that he's blessing him with.
Excuse me one moment while I. Take care of something if I can here and hope without interrupting along. They're there now. This one, right? This one. Just keep open brush right? Sorry. Should be open. Check it and see. Make sure. Okay, that's all right. Okay. So it's really a lot of blessing, right? And then, of course, like I said, oil involves lots of resources, meaning you're healthy, right? You can process it, you can participate in all this activity. So it's a full richness. And then it also talks about, in the verses that follow this, not only the abundance of grain. Abundance is a good word for rov, greatness. It's multiplicity, that kind of thing, of grain and sweet wine. And then it goes on to talk about military might and political power, right? So that they'll have the ability to keep hostile neighbors at bay, and it infers this comprehensive predominance. It's not like aggressive strength or anything like that, but it is a predominance that is significant and stable, and that's what's kind of emphasized there in these opening verses, in this blessing that's given to Yitz'khaq, that is thought to be that Yitz'khaq is given, it's thought to be going to Esav, but it's going to Yaakov, right? I want to end up today with a final thought about all of this that actually came to me this morning. After I put all this stuff together, it actually was a revelation that I had with my chavruta partner, my study buddy, which is my wife, as we were just discussing things. If you don't have one of those, you really need to find one. A chavruta. The idea, not a wife, but
now I do really get you why you were attracted to dog.
But a chavruta. If you ever have that imagery in a yeshiva, in a Jewish study hall, of the two guys sitting across from the table with a script, with books and things, and they're talking and they're arguing and they're going back and forth. And that's what a havruta is. It's like a friendship. It's like a companionship, but they're dedicated and they've kind of locked horns. And that's been done by the rabbi. The rabbi of that yeshiva says, you're paired up. And the idea is that the rabbi knows different people's strengths and weaknesses, and he puts them together so that they'll interact in a very beneficial way, right? That's the idea. Anyway, that's my part. Say all that to say that the conclusion is different than what this worksheet might tend to give you. So we'll see how that goes. But there's a lot of things in this narrative. We won't go through all of these details because of time. But one of the things that kind of comes across initially, and I think that I hear by a lot of people who don't really study the Bible, there's people out there who they've read it before. They kind of know the story. They know about Noah and the ark, and they know about Abraham and him sacrificing his son, and they may even know about the conflict between Esav and Yaakov, and how he dresses up to deceive his father, and so the question ends up being, these are supposedly the patriarchs and the examples, and is deceit a good thing or a bad thing? Is it okay to use deceit when you're trying to do what God wants to have done? And all those kind of questions arise. And the Torah doesn't specifically come out and give you definitive answers. That's what I love about it, because I find that it takes a lot of wrestling with the text and with the ideas and with what's happening in it. And you have to really want to see something, right? Like Don and I were talking about the verses that say, we read one of them today in the Haftarah, that God hated Esau and he loved Yaakov, right? And right off if you were to read something like that, you go, I can't go with a God that hates. Oh, that's unfair, and you kind of shove it aside. But you don't really understand what's happening there until you accept the fact that what it says is true, right? And you deal with it, and you try to wrestle with it, and that's why later on we know that Yaakov wrestles with God, right? It's like he's accepted things, but there's some wrestling to be done to work them out, and I'll kind of give you the end takeaway. The end takeaway for today is the first thing we have to do is accept that what God says and does is true and right. It's the way it's supposed to be, and we have to just accept it and then deal with it, right? We have to deal with who God made us to be. I have to accept the fact that he made me and put me in a certain place at a certain time, and then deal with that. you know, when you look at things like firstborn and secondborn, those are the kinds of things that children have to accept because they just are that way, right? I mean, if you're a firstborn, you can't be anything but that, right? And you have to accept that, and then deal with whatever the issues are that come up. Or I mean, as we all well know today, there's a lot of not accepting the way God made us in today's world, right? Did he make us male or female, or whatever? Did he put us in particular families? Did he make a certain race? Whatever it is, dealing with all those things, the fact is that what we have to first do is accept that, and then deal with the issues that come along with that. And the end takeaway for today is when we look at all this stuff about Rivka, and she sets up this ruse, right, with her son, dresses him up as his brother. I mean, come on, that's a pretty dramatic thing to do, right? To deceive his father, to give him the blessing, and all along when you're reading the story, you're thinking, yeah, we know some things about this story where she's right in what she's trying to do, but the way she's doing it, do the ends justify the means? And you start having all these questions in your mind about these people and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And the conclusion I finally came to, and discussing this with Donna this morning, the conclusion is that righteousness is righteousness no matter what. Deceit and deceptiveness is deceptiveness no matter what. And this story, if you look at it, actually tells you that, right? Because if you look at the whole narrative, and we've got to jump a little bit ahead to see this. Yaakov is a supplanter and a deceiver. We know that about his personality, and we see that in the story. And we know that in the future, he gets deceived by Lavan, right? Remember when he thinks he's marrying Rachel, and he winds up with Leah, and what does he say to Lavan? You deceiver. Literally, he says, you deceived me. And it's kind of like, ooh, there's fingers pointing back at that, But here's the thing about the conclusion, if you will, is that in the end, when we see, because we can do this because you guys know the story, right? In the end, when Yaakov finally meets up with his brother after fleeing, right? It's like 20 years later, something like that. And he finally meets up with his brother in the future from our story, right? After he wrestles with God, he finally meets up with his brother, and what does he do when he meets him? He apologizes. He basically says, man, you know what? On my deceit and all that stuff, that was wrong. I want to give you back everything I took from you. Look at what he gave you. He's giving him flocks and herds. He's giving this big gift. He's giving him the product of the dew from heaven and the richness of the ground. Right? He's basically saying, this is all yours, and I stole from you. I want to give it back to you. I want to reconcile in that way, to say that I was wrong, and he bows down to him multiple times, right? Which is a part of the prophetic thing. He's saying, I'm giving you back the honor that is due you. All the stuff that I took, that I became because of the stuff, right? And he says, I'm giving it all back. So he is saying that he was wrong. He's saying his actions were wrong. And his mom's he should have stood up to his mom and said, no, we're not going to do this way. This isn't right? But he didn't. And, as you read the story, you see, and I think in some ways we try to help God also. We try to justify the means of the things that we do because we think it's part of God's plan. And part of this conclusion is that actions always have consequences. It's like physics, equal and opposite reactions and all those kinds of things, and you look at the results. So Yaakov himself confesses at the end, He makes restitution, attempts to, as best he can, right? And you look at Rivka never sees him again after he leaves. So do you think she didn't pay a price?
Yeah.
She paid a price for her. I mean, the one thing she wanted was her son, right? And she's got to send, and she even tells him, go away and come back. You'll come back as soon as, things cool. She never sees him again. I mean, there's consequences for actions. And then the other part of it is that when you look at the blessings that Yitz'khaq gives, whether it's in deceit or not, they represent the blessings that were supposed to go to the rightful sons. Right? This blessing of dew of heavens, riches of the earth, military might, and all that kind of stuff was supposed to go to Esau. What you don't see in this blessing is the covenant promises. You don't see land. You don't see progeny, right? So Yitz'khaq is giving Esau's blessing to Yaakov. See, and so what Rivka was trying to orchestrate, she didn't need to because he was going to do this anyway, right? That's the other part of this that contributes to that whole thing. We're not just talking about blessing. We're talking about the contents of the blessing. He's giving Esau, the hunter-gatherer strongman, richness and military might and all the things that Esau likes. That's what he wants. He wants stuff. Right? Is that what we were saying? He wants the stuff. And he wants the power. And he wants all that. And Yitz'khaq is saying, well, you're a strong guy. You're a smart guy. You're going to get it. And then when it comes to Yaakov, when he's sending him away, thinking they're sending him away to get married, right? What does he say? You're inheriting the promises of Abraham, children of the land. He gives him the covenant promises. And all of that would have happened without all that deceit and struggle and strife. Right? So the story really is telling us these things. Yeah, Wayne.
You just said what I was going to say, but because the essence of the blessing that he gave to his other son is the same as the blessing that he gave to Isaac. The essence is the same. It's all about physical, material stuff. It is not until he's sending him away to look for a bride that he gets Abraham's covenant blessing. It was like it just because when we read the story, we want everything to be all God or not God, and it's not written like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's written like he's all man and this is all God, and it's all mixed together and jumbled together. And what we have to do is differentiate between those two things. We've said that already a few weeks ago. This is how I feel, or this is what I think. But this is what God said. This is what God did. God wasn't putting his stamp of approval on Yitz'khaq's mother when she's making all those decisions. He's just saying that the decisions are right. Like you've already said, but it's not the way she went about it. That was all her flesh. It's all interwoven, and we have to look for what is it that God is saying, what is it that God's purpose and God's. When you pull those out and draw them out, it allows man to be, in the progress of growing in his understanding of who God is by those interactions and responses to what God has said. Because I had not ever seen the fact that the two blessings were basically the same stuff until the second blessing is given to Isaac when he's leaving. And that's the Abrahamic covenant blessing is being given to him. And so it was already Yaakov knew what he was doing. It wasn't like a new, it wasn't because of all the other stuff that happened that this took place.
Yeah, and actually when you look at the blessing that Yaakov gives to Esav. Remember, Esav he's crying and he's upset, and he says, "Bless me, you got to have a blessing for me too." He gives him a blessing. Let me find it here. In chapter 27, verse 38. He's weeping and he says, "Give me a blessing. You have to have something for me." And his father answered him, "Here, your home will be of the richness of the earth and of the dew from heaven above." Now, we see that in this first verse here, right? See dew from heaven and richness of the earth. But there's something that's kind of hidden in the Hebrew, and even this way this is translated, when it says, and again, this is the way the Torah teaches. Okay, this is the way the Torah communicates ideas, which requires just digging just a little bit beyond the surface, but it's there. So look, it says, he says, your home will be of the richness of the earth and of the dew from heaven. And literally in the Hebrew, well, it takes this where it says from the dew of the heavens, and this here where it says dew of heavens and the richness of it, and it puts the word min in front of it, which literally means from, which I think is better interpreted. This verse of the blessing that he gives to Esau is, your home will be from, as in away from the richness of the earth and away from the dew of heaven. I mean, that's a better interpretation, in my opinion, of the Hebrew, better translation. And one way you also see that is the words are reversed, right? Here it's the dew of the heavens and the richness of the earth. And in this blessing for Yitz'khaq, it's the richness of the earth and the dew from heaven. It's the reverse, right? It's kind of saying that this is a reverse of this, the blessing that he gave to Yaakov. And then when you look historically at Esav, who becomes Edom and all that later on, well, the land of Edom is a barren kind of land. It's away from the richness. It's not like the land of Israel that has all this moisture and so forth. It's more desert. And actually, that whole kingdom doesn't make any financial gain from agriculture and so forth. It makes gain by pillaging other people, right? And caravans of trade that come through. How it survives is off of all those kinds of things. So do you see how that translation of this verse is probably, I think, more accurate? And it comes from the Hebrew.
It's a little bit of a mirror of what we saw with Avraham when he blessed Ishmael and his other children. He gave them provision, but he sent them away from Yitz'khaq. He sent them away from the land. He said they were not part of the covenant blessing that was in that area.
So in this verse, when he's giving the blessing to Esau here, I think he's giving it to Esau to be of the dew of heaven, of the riches from the earth. But once he's given that blessing to Yaakov, and now he knows that, he realizes they can't have the same thing. It's maybe something like that. So he says, well,
or be in the same place.
Yeah, your thing is going to be away from that. It's going to be separate from. Kind of like, I guess what you're saying is, separated from the covenantal promises that are given to Yaakov. There has to be a separation from that. Yeah.
But the blessings of the earth and the dew and the fruit from the land and all that is not something that goes solely all of it to only one person.
Okay.
What he's saying is he gave that blessing to Yitz'khaq, but
to Yaakov.
There's also that same thing available to Esau. The overlordship of all of that is what can't be given to more than one. So Yitz'khaq has he's the overlord of all of that by the blessing that was given. That can't be shared. But the blessings that the earth provides mankind can be shared with anybody. We gave the same blessing to both of them.
Yeah, and actually, in the wisdom of the sages, if you will, the Haftarah reading that we did in Malachi today, it talked about how God blesses the nations. It's like It's like he's saying the blessing is not just for the chosen people. He blesses all the nations. And the key is, who are you serving? You know, if you're serving Hashem, the God, he's got plenty of blessing. It's an abundance mentality, not a, what's the opposite of that? You have abundance mentality and you have
Poverty mentality.
it's like a limited, like there's a pie, and if you get one piece, I have less, right? But it's like there's plenty for everybody, and there's even more than enough for everybody.
Sure, but before we apply Torah
Abundance.
backwards, this is pre-Torah, this is pre-Sinai, and culturally, parents were allowed to choose who was going to inherit from them in the
Scarcity, yeah.
in the other cultures, Hittite, etc., of the ancient world. So there was no rule on firstborn gets XYZ at this point in time, and parents could designate that.
Choose, yeah.
And they could choose. Obviously, in the long run of things, a choice was made here, if not before that, like you're pointing out, because this is what Yitz'khaq decided to give Esau at the time. So a lot of people will say, but you know, Torah says da 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 da. So therefore, these guys back here were like out of line and against Torah. It hadn't been given yet, and we see in Torah the Lord fixing all of the problems that happened back before that, and saying, "Hey, this is a better order." But nevertheless, you know, here we are ahead of that. And ahead of, you know, those words coming at Mount Sinai that would help them move into the future in a little bit easier, smoother way.
What I find is interesting is the honesty and openness of the situation. God's purpose is going to happen. He's going to make it happen. Whatever they thought they were going to do to be able to manipulate that, of course, failed. But it exposes who they are and the journeys they are and how they change. Like with you know, Jacob, before he becomes Israel, he had to go through a transformation process. You had to know where he was coming from to see where he ended up and what caused that to happen. So even though this wasn't kosher, so to speak, in the modern way of putting it today, and how they went about it, it's still God's honesty and how it's written shows us the characters and who they were, what motivated them, so we can learn lessons from them and benefit from that, not to go down those same paths.
Yeah, I think there's a way of reading the story. You can read the story as if you were one of the characters and you don't know what the others know, right? And you're making your decisions and you're doing your things right. And then really, the only time you can really realize what's happened is after, right? And I think that's for all of us. We really only know our mistakes and the outcomes and all that by looking back. We're going, oh, that was dumb. But did I learn from it? Yeah, I did. And I changed. And now, you know, and you see that with Yaakov when he makes restitution with his brother. I mean, you see the guy's changed. You even see it with Esav.
Right.
He says, no, brother, I've got plenty. God's blessed me, right? And that he's grown up, right? Mm-hmm. So we see those changes, which kind of says there's hope for us.
That shows the process and the progress that each of us make in our lives as we're going through and dealing with things as best as we can with the information that we have at the moment, what we've heard from God, what we haven't heard, all of those things, and to know that I'm not good enough to mess up God, you know, like exactly.
I'm not big enough.
Yeah, I can't mess up the final plan. So, you know, if I am living a life that is conversant with God and you have a relationship and all of that kind of thing, because clearly we watched this with Yaakov. He's talking to God all those years about all these situations and whatnot. God's plan, like you said, is going to happen regardless. How well we traverse that is a different story. Yeah. But knowing, I think, that ultimately, you know, the Lord's got this. So not that I'm intentionally going to try and mess it up, but if I do mess up along the way, he's going to be faithful to make it happen and
Well,
to make it all work out.
And you look at Yaakov's final words when he's talking to Pharaoh at the end. We know the end of the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Pharaoh says, "Oh, tell me about your life." And what does he say?
He said, "How old are you?"
Oh, he says that.
And he said, "My years have been few,
Few
and difficult."
and difficult have
Something
been
like
my
that.
years. He's like 137 years old, I think, or something like that. And he said, and he's telling Pharaoh, after he's been saved from famine and all that, he goes, "Well, my life has been few in years and difficult." It's kind of like he's saying, this whole story is saying, is that the kind of life you want? Few and difficult, to see it as that way? Or do you want a life of abundance and the dew of the heavens and the richness of the earth and the blessing of
Which,
of
even
Hashem?
when you think further into that story, and you're looking at Yaakov, and he clearly did not learn the lesson about favoritism with siblings.
Because he doesn't.
Because he perpetuates it. But I think that spoke to me about the fact that we talk in our day and age, and I think, mental health corners are talking more and more about this. It's called generational trauma. And how when you're experiencing things in your life, it can physically tweak your DNA so that what you transmit to the next generation, they're walking in your trauma. Whatever happened in your life, because it actually affects you physiologically, and you walk with and give that over to the next generations. So it's not just like, a bad habit or anything like that. They can actually, future generations are going to be dealing with some of that physiologically that was suffered in the past, which is a crazy idea. But then we think about God saying, look, the stuff visits the third and fourth generation, so we got to go for the blessing. We need God's blessing to pass that on to the generations as well, and hoping that has a greater impact in their life than the traumas. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you
We
see
all need
that.
therapy. Right?
You see that in Native communities,
Yeah.
right? With the Holocaust they faced here, you see that in Jewish communities with the Holocaust situation, and other places, the Armenians, wherever there's been trauma, you see it, and it does affect. So it does make it makes a lot more sense when he says it's the next generation to the next generation, because things change, and it takes time for those to recover and to move forward.
But you can rise above those
You can.
circumstances.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, this thought crossed my brain, what you were saying earlier about that God does not only bless the Jewish nation. This verse, Psalm 33:12, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord.
Yep. It's not just limited. Yeah, no.
Yeah, going back to the blessing between Esau and Yaakov, Yitz'khaq was deceived by who was standing in front of him, and he extended the same blessing that God had given to his father Avraham, in that I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. That was an extension of the blessing that God specifically gave Abraham. Now we see Isaac extending that blessing to whom he thought was Esau, but God had already declared that the younger would rule over the older. I'm sure that bit of information was shared between Rebekah and Isaac many years before the event. Now, we don't know exactly what, but for whatever reason, Isaac was not accepting that. And so he extends the blessing that his father had to Jacob, unbeknowingly. So Esau could have been blessed by following that pattern, as well as any of the other nations that have.
Sure, right.
Well, his uncle and whatever. That blessing was continuous. And because Esau's focus on what is important and what isn't, that went straight over his head. He knew that from his grandfather. He knew that from his father. And that blessing now has been given to his brother. He knew, I think, the context of that blessing, but he didn't act on it.
Yeah, I think possibly both Esav and Yitz'khaq were kind of enamored in his skills as a hunter, all the kind of worldly, if you will, manly
Right.
successes and all that, that kind of maybe blinded them a little bit to the bigger picture. I don't know for sure, but
How many preachers' kids grow up with that same thing?
yeah.
Raised in one environment, but rejected for the material aspects of life.
One of the things that Don and I were talking about this morning is that when we read these narratives, sometimes we get a little bit of tunnel vision because they are sparse, but the Torah is just gorgeous literature in the way it's crafted and put together, because it does, like I say, if you look at the whole picture, lots of different ways, you can see that the truths just emerge. And the more I study it, the more I see that. It's just amazing. But one of the things we don't see in the Torah is a lot of the details. And that makes it sometimes kind of hard for us to see these as real people that have real lives, that have ordinary things happening in their life. And one of the ways that I've appreciated in recent years, as I've looked at other literature, other ancient literature, is how some of that gets fleshed out a bit in other literature. And I used to kind of poo-poo, rabbinic and Talmudic, stories, and it's like, how did they get that? That's so wacky and way off. But I've learned that if I take a look at some of those things a little deeper, just step back and say, okay, that does sound wacky, but tell me more about that. I find out that there's some wisdom in how that is crafted and supports the story. And it's just kind of that way in the lives of these people. We don't see the whole picture. I mean, we know Esav as a hunter and a man's man, so to speak, right? But we don't know lots of detail. Because you see that, and then you also see him crying when he doesn't get a blessing, and that's a little out of character. So there's some emotional aspect of him. For an adult person, and the man's man, to break down and weep because he doesn't get a blessing. I mean, come on, toughen up, or whatever. But there's something there that presents a little disconnect, but that shows you that there's something deeper going on in this person, right? And take it away. That's where this comes in.
Well, I had read this years ago, and you can read a small account of it if you're familiar with the book of Jasher, or Yasher. It's in the 27th chapter. It follows the narrative of Genesis. And it's also, I don't know the date of that text, but it is old as well. That if we backed up in the story to when Yaakov is in the kitchen cooking, and Esau comes flying in the house, starving and needing food, and he sells, like literally sells his possessions and his portion of the inheritance to his little brother to be able to eat food. And a lot of sermons have been preached about, selling the farm for beans, kind of thing. But these other stories that help to shed some light, if not, you don't have to take it as fact verbatim, but it helps us to see the human part of what was happening in that world. the story is that Nimrod, if you remember that name, is a mighty hunter, and he's the king of Babel. And he's out, and Esau goes from wherever he goes all over the place hunting and everything. Nimrod has apparently watched this guy and is jealous of his skill, because I believe Nimrod is called the great hunter, kind of thing. He's jealous of Esau's skill, but they're just kind of watching, they're aware of it. For whatever reason, they conflict in a field one day and get into a sword fight. And Esau kills Nimrod and two of his companions, and has to then run for his life because the rest of the entourage is after him. So Esau is running literally for his life because he's totally expecting to be overtaken and killed. Nimrod's guys. So he gets back home, he flies into the house. His only concern is he's exhausted. He needs food because he's got to keep running. We'll see the shadows of this in Torah with the whole avenging someone who has murdered someone or killed someone accidentally, right? You have to run to a sanctuary city and hide, but if you are overtaken before you get to safety, the family of the person that died can take you out. So this is the, kind of the culture in that whole scenario. So Esau is completely gone. I'm going to die anyway, but I got to give it my best shot. And he said, give me some food because I got to go. And what does my birthright mean to me anyway? I'm going to be dead. Take it. Take all of it, little bro, and do well. And give me the food. I got to go. Kind of thing. So if we have any kind of idea in our head that something else, it's not just him wandering in one day because he needs lunch. There's something else going on that he would be willing to give up the stuff that he wanted and the things that he knew he was going to get as a son of this rich family. Something else has to be motivating him other than the fact that, he can't wait till dinner time or whatever. So to pull out and to look at that possibility or something like that having been happening in his world, in their world, that would, influence that. I mean, if you have siblings, how many times have you gone in there, you guys you tell your little person, hide this, hide this because so-and-so's going to come and get it or whatever. You know that little kids will do that. And here we have the adult version of it. Help me out, man, because I'm going to die. And I think he may even say something weird like that.
Even without that background, the incident itself says very clearly that my present need is more important than my future blessing.
Right.
Future.
I don't have a future at this moment.
This right now, immediate need is much more important to me than anything that could come in the future. So it demonstrates what you're saying. With or without the backdrop.
Sure.
It's very.
The backdrop is helpful for me, having grown up with this stuff and having all the sermons in my brain about, the trivial selling of Esau's birthright. I'm like, I'm like, no, it's got to be something more important.
And one of the things that does for me is it helps me not to just like Don's saying, write off lightly why people do what they do, because in reality, I mean, look at our lives. It probably doesn't take much for you to think about a time when you did something. Well, it might have been stupid, but you had some reason, some really good reason for why you're willing to break your own values. Remember last week I was talking about how going the extra mile, but always evaluating your values in what you get back from that in order to figure out, do I keep going with this or do I not? Or push back or pull back or leave, right? And all that's based on extending yourself, but always checking your values. And so that aspect of all of this is important, I think, because it helps us to really put our values significant in spite of maybe those circumstances. We're being pursued by somebody who wants to kill us. Do we break our values? Do we go against that because it's going to get us out of a tight spot, and then we'll deal with that, the rest of that later, or what, right? So, and I think that's one of the things that helps me with here in saying sometimes we need to maybe override those emotions. I mean, because clearly Esav had emotions because he had them before his father, right? In conjunction with this birthright, which now he seems to care about. So that's the other thing. Why does he even care about the birthright now if he didn't care about it back then? If it was just a bowl of soup, right, and he didn't care about it, why is he weeping and crying in front of his father now if he didn't care about it? Well, the reality was he did care about it, but there was something else that was driving him to make a decision that he would later regret, right? And I think that's a much more real scenario for us. And then especially when we look back at our lives, that's when we know, when we look back, we go, oh, wow, I compromised my values, and I paid a price for that. Rivka paid a price for deceit, right? And Yaakov paid a price for deceit. And he learned, and he tries to make restitution. And wow, the Torah is just so immensely valuable in informing us of that. Does it make it so that we don't make those mistakes? I don't know. Sometimes I think we have to learn by making them. I don't know that we can be told not to. We were talking about that about our grandkids. How far do you go in, letting them fail or not letting, it's a tough kind of thing. Well, sometimes you have to let them bounce before they it gets. Yeah.
Is there any indication of how much time between the two incidents of him giving up his birthright for the porridge and then crying over?
Good question. I don't know if there's a time.
Well, it goes into the incidents with the selling of the birthright happened back at the beginning of this parashah in chapter 25.
Right.
And if you read that now, you'll see, what we're talking about as far as the language is here. One day Yaakov had cooked some stew. Esav came in from the open country exhausted and said to Yaakov, please let me gulp down some of that red stuff. I'm exhausted. And then Yaakov says, first sell me your rights as the firstborn. He said, look, I'm about to die. What used to
that wasn't
are
a
my
flippant
rights?
statement.
Yeah, it's not.
It's like that's a heartfelt. I mean, he's in big trouble.
Yeah, what are my rights?
See, the story reads so differently now, right?
So swear to me. So yeah, and then there's the famine and the issue over the wells and everything. So it's some time, I would assume.
And it's kind of,
but they don't really give you.
It's kind of hard to say because there's a lot of. One time he was doing this, and there's no real chronological thing.
And we don't know actually how Esau got out of that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the next thing we seem to be hearing about is that he's married women and his parents aren't happy with his choices.
I was thinking one might have been a decision of youth, and we make some really foolish decisions when we're young, and then he began to realize, hey, I really had something in my hand and I threw it away. And in his old age, then he began to say, wow, what did I do?
Well, and it's also possible that he thought
he lived through the situation, obviously.
Yeah, he lived through it. But it's also possible that he thought, oh, I was under duress, so that really doesn't count. That because when he goes in with the game to his dad asks him, who are you? And he doesn't just say, I'm Esav.
Yeah.
He says,
his dad is blind now.
But he says, I'm your firstborn. He's kind of trying to convince his dad that he still has that right of firstborn. It's kind of, so he's, he doesn't just say, I'm Esav. That would be the thing to say. It's me, it's Esav. And he says, I'm your firstborn. He's making a point. He's almost like pressing the point that, I know about this thing in the past that I kind of gave it away, but that didn't count. So I have to accept that now, or something like that. And the narrative comes across that way. So.
But I think this, you know, Esau and Yaakov have different voices. Isn't Yitz'khaq picking up on this? Why is this?
He
Why is
did.
he
Yeah.
picking up on
He
this?
does. He even says that.
Voices.
He even says that. It's
But
it's yeah. All the other deceptions kind of overrule that maybe a little bit. But there's also some midrashic discussion that
He knew.
that
He knew, I think he knew.
yeah. There's
I'm
this
like, I'm
concept.
sorry.
Don thinks that this was all a ruse by both Rivka and Yitz'khaq.
Yeah.
And there's
That's
There's
right.
midrashic support for that perspective. But also there's this concept that Yaakov was you know, it says it's the voice of Yaakov, but the hands of Esav. It's kind of like Yaakov is kind of growing up into being more like Esav, you know. So there's this combination deal that's kind of going on there too.
When you said that, they kind of both seem to be into that little mischief. It seems to me that it might be true because he also made Yaakov lord over all his kinsmen. And if he thought that was Esav, he wouldn't have done that, would he? Because he was not supposed to.
Or he favored him,
Yeah, yeah.
because he was a man's man.
Well, you know, from the very beginning, they know that the younger is going to be the person, right? Rivka knows the younger is going to be. This is where they get into meddle God's affairs, right? And try to make it happen.
Try to make it happen, yeah.
And what they did, we saw what happened with that with Abraham, right? With Sarah, you know, with the maid and handmaid and all that stuff. But when you look at that, I'm sure, you know, Jacob would have gone to his mother and said, well, I got his birthright. I bought it from him for a bowl of stew. I mean, she's going to tell Isaac. I mean, the families discuss this stuff, but they have this stuff in the back of their mind. They have this, and I appreciate the midrash about that Isaac knew that this wasn't Esav, but he went for it anyway, and for whatever reason. But you know, you see all this machinations that these people try to force God's will to happen, and ultimately it's going to happen.
We're talking about a tribe situation, right? So there's a lot of people that are dependent on this household for their livelihood.
Yeah.
Whatever they decide to do and however they pull this off, it has to be convincing to all of those people in order for them to follow whoever
Who's
they
gonna be
put
the next
in the
leader?
next leadership. If they put the wrong guy in there and everybody doesn't believe it, then they're not going to follow him. So I am of the opinion that
You know,
they came up with this plan, and it had to be so convincing so that the entire household
so everybody had to hear
had
Esau
to
crying.
hear it. They had to hear everything and to know it, so that they knew that
Here's
Yaakov
what happened.
is the guy. He's the next chief of the clan, and we're following this man, and he's the next boss.
It is not conclusive though.
It's not.
Because there are clues even in the text that say where Rivka tells Yaakov, flee to your brother, to my brothers to find a wife, right? And then when Yitz'khaq is sending away, he says, go, walk, go. So it's like the Torah is contrasting. Rivka's going, flee, and Yaakov's going, okay, I guess you're right. We can send him. So go. You know, it's like he was convinced to do this, but he didn't really know the motivation behind it.
But again, that sends a message to all of the household. If he's running for his life, we don't want to follow this guy. But if he's being sent to go get married, he's coming back, and he will be in his station. It has to look good to everybody in the house. Several hundred people.
You know, and the big thing I get from this too is families are complicated and messy. You know, it's not saying we have permission for that, but it's just saying that it's not straightforward sometimes. And there are people that have good intentions that do wrong things, and you don't always know until you look back. And I don't. It's just all in all encouraging, you know, to me, that especially that God's purposes are going to be worked out, in their lives, despite the difficulty of our origins and that we made them that way. Yeah, did you have something?
There's a lot of talk about Esau, but what does this say about Jacob's character? In that he had a resource in great supply, and he had someone who really needed some of that resource, and he, instead of giving it really with an open hand, he demanded an outrageous price for it.
Mm-hmm. Very good point.
What does that say about him?
Yes. Well, he's a manipulator and a conniver and a supplanter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
his personality.
definitely in the story that clearly wants to communicate that about him. Yeah.
Who did he inherit that from?
Yeah. Who did he get that from? His mom.
Rhetorical question. Rhetorical question.
Wayne's waving his hand, and then Billy.
Back to Esau. It's interesting that Esau identifies himself with a lie, because Esau has sold his birthright long before this incident, and when he says, "Who are you?" it's, "I am your firstborn."
Yeah.
This is a lie. It isn't until after he's lied that he says who he is. He's Esau. So he's bringing up something that no longer exists for him, that's been sold to his brother.
There's clearly deceit on his side also, but I think the story kind of says it's a lie with reason. I mean, like all the lies here are. They all have some reason behind them.
There's always a reason.
Yeah, Billy.
I would say sometimes too, when you're young, you don't value something, and it might be. I see it as kind of like a youth might not value their parents and grandparents, or someone might not value their spouse. But all of a sudden, when they get something like cancer or something where it becomes real that they're gonna die, all of a sudden there's something that has that flip.
Twitch, yeah.
And I think it was probably the same situation with them is, oh, wow, this is real. I'm losing this. And so the thing he took for granted was the thing that suddenly became real when you realized, oh,
It's gone.
my dad is getting old. He's passing it on now. What have I done?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that hit him, and then also probably for Jacob, when he said it, he may have even thought it's just so absurd to ask for him. He'll never say yes. I'm just going to jokingly say this. And then he was shocked when his brother said, yeah. So, okay.
Joshua wanted to add, Esau had the faith and fear of his father Yitz'khaq and grandfather Avraham. Or no, if he had the faith and fear of his father Yitz'khaq and grandfather Avraham, he would have known that the promise. He would have known that the promise he was born into, not even death would undo it.
Yeah.
Good, Jake.
Yeah. And there's also external references to Yitz'khaq being a really significant person. I mean, even though in the Torah it's just like one parashah, and he seems like he's more like a pawn in everything that's going on around him, right? But there's a reference to him later on in the Torah where it talks about the fear of Yitz'khaq, and it's given as a title. It's like this guy was significant and substantial, and there was something about him that's documented in other literature and so forth about his life that's not necessarily here.
Well, there was this whole discovery thing on Esau and Edom about the kingdom and how it came about and how fearsome it was, and you just historically. So I mean, this was not a guy that was passive in any way. He was to have created what he did. He had to have been of a certain personality trait, So I mean, there was probably a lot of power, a lot of external kind of aggression in different ways, and whether he be emotionally, not always include with that. I mean, you could be a very calm person. I think the way they describe him, each one in their characters in the very beginning, as Jacob was a man of the tents and this and that, it speaks a lot. because it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of determination, and to be on the aggressive side to accomplish what Eden did in his for his kingdom.
For his kingdom, yeah.
And then what Jacob had to do. So, I mean, these are very simple descriptions.
Yeah.
But then when you see the historical records, and it was just an interesting thing for me to watch this documentary on his life and his kingdom and how it got to be so powerful. And it was shrewd, it was aggressive, it was taking control.
And you actually see that in the Torah when the children of Israel are coming up, and are they supposed to go through the land of Edom? And God says, no, I already gave him. I gave that. It's like God saying, I've been dealing with them also, and they've actually completed what you haven't even touched yet, right? You're going to go into your land again. But he says, I gave that to him, and he's done. He's got his place. It's almost like anything, there's an example for you. Now go do likewise, kind of a thing, right? That's not. I'm interjecting, but it's that concept.
But if we think back to Abraham and what we see of him in the beginning, he goes to war.
A warrior, yeah.
And he
has an
is
army.
a conqueror and whatnot. And we see that even in the midst of whatever else is going on in his world, but we see that he is a warrior in his own right with his entourage as well. The whole thing going back to the 5 kings in the valley. Not to mention, when he went out and rescued Lot the first time.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay. Relate.
What's this name of this thing we just now changed on the screen here? There's a name for that.
What?
Well, this whole thing that we read in unison thing.
Oh, the
The Elenu.
The Elaine?
Elenu.
The Elainu.
Which literally means it is ours.
Oh.
It is our duty. That's what we're going to recite as our traditional closing prayer for our time together. Again, thank you for all the love, the input, the discussion, the food, spiritual food, and the physical food too. That's always awesome. So, let's pray together as we close our time. It is our duty to praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the one who created from the beginning, that he called us from the nations of the earth and chose us as his family, a treasured people, and placed our portion in Yeshua. We are your people, whom you redeemed. We therefore bow and worship and give thanks before the King of Kings, the Holy One. Blessed is he who extends the heavens and establishes the earth, whose throne of glory is in the heavens above, and whose power's presence is in the highest of heights. He is our God, there is no other. Truly, he is our King, there is none else. As it is written in his Torah, you shall know and take to heart this day that Adonai is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Therefore we place our hope in you, Adonai our God, that we may soon see the glory of your power, when you will remove abominations from the earth, and idols will be utterly destroyed, when the world will be perfected under the sovereignty of the Almighty, when all humanity will call on your name to turn all the earth's wicked towards you, and all the world's inhabitants will realize and know that to you every knee must bow, and every tongue swear loyalty. Before you, Adonai our God, we will kneel and bow down and give honor to your glorious name. We will all accept the yoke of your kingdom, and you will reign over us soon and forever. For the kingdom is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory. As it is written in your Torah, Adonai will reign forever and ever. And it is said, then Adonai shall be king over all the earth. On that day, Adonai shall be one, and his name one. And Father, I thank you that you have created us all uniquely, and you have placed us in your universe for your purpose. And I just pray that you would help each of us to find and embrace the role that you have given us. And it said that the day we were created, you determined that the universe could not exist without us. So you placed us here. Help us, Lord, to embrace who you have made us to be, to find that, and to help others find their place also. We bless you and thank you for your word, your truth, and our fellowship together. Let's pray together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher noten lanu et hadavar hachayim beyeshua HaMashiach. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, King of the universe, who gives to us the living word in Messiah Yeshua. Amen and amen and amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Right here on this side.
Yeah.